Greetings, students. Welcome to another session here of TESOL Methods and Materials training. My name is Dr. Frank Tuzzi. Today we're going to be talking about proficiency levels and the different effects that proficiency has when teaching. First, we're going to talk about defining proficiency. What is a beginner? What is an intermediate? What is an advanced? That's always a problem when you walk into any system. Any school that you have, they're going to say, oh, these are beginning level students. Well, what defines a beginning level student? Who decides those things? Years ago, the Foreign Services Institute began doing research and began developing. If you'll recall, earlier when I was showing you the number of hours it would take for a student of English to learn Thai or Swahili, you saw that list of hours and the list of levels 1, 2, and 3. Well, that came from the Foreign Services Institute, and they had done extensive research on that. Later, the ACTFL organization, which is I think it's the American Council on Teaching Foreign Languages, and they created their own proficiency scales, and they also created tests to allow teachers to find out particularly what level a particular person was. So those levels and those guides were very important. You can go out and get them. The ACTFL system is available at their website, actfl.org, and you can just go here under publications and you can see their proficiency guidelines. Ding. There we are. So you can look here through the general guidelines, and then you can download the actual guidelines. And then you can see them. They are rather robust and rather detailed. It means that you can look and see what these guidelines are in detail for your particular level. This is 24 pages long. Wow, this is kind of big. Let's go a little smaller. There we go. So they have superior and advanced, advanced, mid, low, intermediate, and these are speaking guidelines that we're looking at here. They also have writing guidelines, listening guidelines, reading guidelines. Okay, so they do all 4 skills. And again, if you'll notice, let's just go back to speak. They have specific things that these people should be able to do. These learners should be able to do. Advanced low speakers demonstrate ability to narrate and describe in the major time frames of past, present, and future in paragraph length discourse with some control of aspect. Okay, they can handle appropriately the essential linguistic challenges presented by a complication or an unexpected turn of events. Okay, so they're trying to describe in somewhat detail what constitutes an advanced low or an advanced mid, right? And so they have set up wonderful guidelines. They're used all over the place. So it would behoove you to know what these guidelines are when you're working with and or when you're dealing in a school, or even if you're going to have to set up a system and you need a guideline as to what defines intermediate or what defines beginner or novice or whatever word that you decide to use. The foreign language, the foreign services was later taken over by the Interagency Language Roundtable. This organization has basically set up another a similar type of description of what constitutes elementary and limited working proficiency, professional, full professional types of levels, and you can use these as well. I don't see anything wrong with either one of them. The Foreign Services Institute has done a great work for us. It's because of them that these other guides came to be. So those are the ways that we know what is a beginner, what constitutes a beginner. Well, you have to go and read those levels. Are you a 0 or a 0 plus, or are you a 3 or are you a 1, and what constitutes those numbers and those guides? Okay. That's what these are. That's what the ACTFL guides are. That's what the FSI or the ILR guides are. You can get them online, and you should know what they are. By the way, the ACTFL system is for foreign language teaching, so although it's not specifically designed for teaching English to speakers of other languages as far as ESL, EFL, it might be more appropriate, but still, defining what a student can do at a particular level can be done with either the FSI or the ACTFL. That's entirely up to you or the institution that you're working with. Okay, teaching beginning level students. We need to recognize that they are more needy. They have fewer resources, and by resources I'm talking about the stuff that's in their head. They have fewer resources with which to handle and grapple with this new language, this new mode of communication. And so they are the weaker patients. They're going to need more help. They're going to need more guidance. They're going to need more scaffolding, which means that if you're working with students at lower proficiency, it's going to be more work for you in the classroom, right? Some points to remember. Remember the students' cognitive abilities. Remember that they have the ability, if they're older, they have the ability to reason and analyze. You can use that to your advantage. You can start trying to show students how to be independent learners right from the get-go because they have that analytic ability. If they're younger, obviously they're not going to have that. The role of the teacher here for beginning level students is that you are much more hands-on, you're much more helping students and guiding students and providing input because your students have little wherewithal to do anything by themselves. Means that teacher talk is going to be a little more than at the higher levels because you want to provide samples and examples to your students. You still want your students to talk, and they should still be talking more than you when you're in the classroom, but you're going to be a guide. You're going to be a bigger guide. You're going to provide more samples. You're going to provide more pronunciation practice. You're going to provide more answers to questions. Teacher talk is going to be a little higher here. Continue to do authentic language. Make sure the stuff that they are experiencing are materials and ideas and content that they can actually use in the real world when they get out of your classroom. And lastly, well, at least not lastly, some other points that you want to focus on is fluency and accuracy. Generally speaking, again, as I said before, fluency is important, but you don't want to squash motivation. Accuracy is important, but you don't want to squash motivation. So make sure that you're trying to focus on both of these. With regard to which one do you spend more emphasis on, at the beginning level, I would probably spend a little more emphasis on accuracy, because if they make a mistake and they learn a mistake, it's going to be harder for them to unlearn it. But if they learn it first here, then you're going to be better off. Okay, this is just my gut feeling here. Some more points to remember. Again, students can be very creative, even at the younger ages. So if they are creative, let them. Give them the courage and the good environment to allow them to be creative. Please use a variety of techniques, especially at the more beginning level students. Changing up activities is going to be good for them. Short activities is going to be good for them. They're going to learn a small little thing, and then they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to learn something else. Make sure that you have speaking goals and listening goals, reading and writing goals, grammar and vocab. You should be using all 6 of these. Many of the systems that are out there, and you'll notice when you looked at the FSI, not the FSI, you'll notice when you looked at the ACTFL standards earlier, they only did the first 4. They only did listening, speaking, reading, and writing. They only did the skills. They didn't touch the databases. Okay, when I say databases, I'm referring to the grammar database and the lexical database, the vocabulary database. We as teachers at the beginning levels, we should have goals for each one of these. Certain listening goals, certain speaking goals, reading, writing, grammar, and vocab. Especially if you're dealing with someone who's wanting to grapple with all of language. So you're going to have goals for all those. Literally, you want to have them written down so that you can know what they are, that your students can know what they are. Obviously, they're going to be low level. We're dealing with reading. You may be working as low as being able to recognize a word, being able to recognize a sentence, or being able to cluster words. It could be that low. But you should have them. If your school that you're working at doesn't have specific guides for all the levels, you're going to have problems, I would recommend. Vocabulary. Generally, for a typical ESL program at the academic level, they're looking at 3,000 plus words for getting out of an ESL program. Usually it's more, but they don't actually define the higher levels. At the intermediate level, things are going to begin to change. Again, students have cognitive abilities, and they have the ability to learn. They're now going to have more power, more freedom, more independence to learn for themselves. Obviously, you're going to be with younger students who are at this level. They're going to have more cognitive abilities, although they may not have the ability to reason. Because of this, the role of the teacher now has become scaled back more. You're more of a facilitator. You're asking fewer questions. You're giving them more of the reins, allowing them to do more things. Also means that your teacher talk is going to go down, begin to go down. You're going to be giving them the opportunities to do the talking, and you're going to be listening. You're only going to be responding well, you're going to be responding at a lower level, and you should stop talking as much. It's really interesting when new teachers go into a classroom, an ESL classroom, and they record their class and they notice the number later when they watch the video, and they notice how much time it has been since they were talking in the classroom. They talk so much more than they realize. They should be talking less. Continue with authentic language, continue with fluency and accuracy. Generally speaking, you want to keep these at a balance. Again, as I said, if you get an older student when they come in and they are already have mistakes, it's going to be a little more difficult to work on that. You may want to work on fluency more, and only pick your battles with accuracy, only pick your battles with pronunciation. I tend to work with sounds that are one or two reasons. I tend to work with a sound because it impairs meaning. I get a group of Koreans who do not have the F sound in their language, and we have the F sound in our language. So they say, well, I get the pon, they will say. Well, I get the pon. And I don't know what pon is, and a lot of people are going to be lost because they don't know that pon is a phone. And so at that point, I would probably be teaching that F sound. The other reason I would be teaching the F sound is because it's visible. I can see it on my lips, right? I bite my bottom lip when I say something. Found, right? Phone. And I'll do that. I'll find phone. I'm going to be using that. It's visible. I can actually see it, and so that's probably something I'm going to be teaching with regard to accuracy. Now, if a sound is not visible, like an L or an R, I'll probably delay doing that, unless, of course, it impedes meaningful communication. People start to get lost because they're missing those sounds. I may focus on that. Again, more points to remember. Students at the intermediate level, I would encourage you to let them be creative. Let them have some ownership over the language. The techniques and activities that you do are going to be larger. They're going to be longer. They may entail a larger block of time. Some of these could eventually branch into a multi-day type of task. Again, your listening and your speaking skills are going to increase. Rather than just listening for discrete sounds, they're going to be having to listen to a longer block of text and be able to try to answer questions with that. Speaking goals as well. They may have to go out and do interviewing. They may have to prepare a speech. Reading and writing is going to be the same. They're going to continue growing their vocabulary and their grammar understanding so that they can continue to read more. Writing will be the same way. Pushed output production, they're going to be doing more writing at the higher levels. They're going to go beyond just writing sentences. They're going to be moving into paragraphs and small essays. The grammar levels, they're going to be moving into mid-level and more of the rarely used. Actually, they're probably not going to hit the rarely used, but they may hit the rarely used at this point. They're going to start using the conditional and the noun clauses, adjective clauses, adverb clauses. So they're going to be running into more of the things that we would consider standard English usage with the upper levels. At the advanced level, we now have students who, if they have cognitive abilities, they can do pretty much anything they want. The role of a teacher now is you set up a little scenario for them, you give them a project that they can do and let them run. You're sitting back and just monitoring what's going on, providing help as needed, seeing who's involved. Your teacher talk is going to be way off. You're doing very little at this point in terms of the classroom because you don't need to talk. You give them a little instruction. In fact, you could give them the instruction, make them read it or listen to it, and then have them discuss and try to complete whatever project it is. Authenticity of language, you should be by now doing things that they will be able to take directly out, whether it's for a job, whether it's for academics, whether it's socially, things that you want to do. Again, you'll want to continue working on fluency and accuracy. With regard to pronunciation, again, I would tell you to work with sounds that are easier to work with, sounds that are visible and or sounds that are going to impede meaningful communication. Students that have any problems at this level with some grammar that they're having problems with because they continue to get it wrong, those are things that you'll want to notice and try to eliminate. At this level, there should be virtually no grammar issues. Basically, your students have conquered the majority of grammar, and their primary problems now are going to be in other areas. They're going to be primarily in vocabulary and speaking and writing. They're going to be much better off with this idea of listening and reading and grammar. I often hear students say, "Oh, I have a listening problem." And after I speak with them for a little bit, I realize they don't have a listening problem. They have a vocabulary problem. They hear the word perfectly. They just don't know what it means. So you're going to find students who don't necessarily need to learn more reading skill or listening skills. They don't necessarily need to learn more reading skills. They've learned those. And grammar as well. They've conquered the majority of grammar. Their problems are going to be in the realm of vocabulary, primarily writing, especially with little things that they're going to have trouble with. Articles is always a big problem for a lot of students, as well as prepositions. But your role is going to be very much scaled back, especially on the input areas, the reading and listening and grammar. The output areas is you're going to have more things going on. Again, give students more ownership, allow them to be creative, allow them to develop content areas that they're interested in, and they can be a part of the design. Okay. You can see at the different levels we have more control or less control as a teacher, but one of the things that we want to also do is we want to be able to step back and look at the big picture. And that's the scope and sequence. I don't know if you've ever heard of scope and sequence, but it's basically the scope or the depth of the information, and then the sequence of it. How does it lay out? We've looked at some of the guidelines from FSI and ACTFL, and you can see that they have levels of depth. They have some depth, but they don't have how things are written out as you go. And a scope and sequence, in my opinion, should be in any language program. If you are working at if you're working in a school or a program that doesn't have a language scope and sequence, you should have one made. You should make sure that there is one in existence so that any new teacher coming in can look at this and see the big picture. Here's where we're teaching these. Here's where we're doing this. By the time the student graduates, they should know this vocabulary. They should know this grammar. They should have had practice, doing this type of speaking opportunity. They should have been involved in, if it's a college, maybe they should be involved in some sort of writing activities. So you should be able to step back and say, okay, here's the whole picture. Here's everything that we need. Of course, you need to be able to drill down and look at the minutia as well. But you should have in one locale a scope and sequence. Here's an example from a place called Ventures Basic. Let me try to bring this down a little more. There we go. And you can see from this example that we have a welcome unit, and we have a bunch of functions that are listening and speaking skills, vocabulary, and a grammar focus, right? And so this is welcome unit, unit 1, and you can see again they've broken down things so that at each unit you know what it is that they're focusing. What's the vocab, the grammar, the listening, speaking, and the function. So this is functional notional here, right? Functional notional, listening and speaking, right? Vocabulary and grammar. There's very little reading and writing going on here, but this is nicely done. I'm going to see this in a textbook, and I'm going to say to myself, these people have systematized this process so that they can fill in and teach these particular elements. So it's done in certain depth. It becomes more difficult as you go down in the chapters, and it's also, they've laid it out what you're going to be doing one step after the other. Okay, so in my opinion, having something like this is a good sign that the textbook that is being used is going to be worthwhile, is going to be valuable. A scope and sequence. Brown, in his textbook, he does show a good scope and sequence, and I would recommend that you look at it when you go through this particular chapter. Take a look at the details. I didn't go through many of them with regard to the FSI or the ACTFL standards. But you should become familiar with those, especially if you're going to be teaching. And always remember that when you're going to be working in a program, you should have a scope and sequence. If you don't, you should ask about getting one developed. Even you can develop one for your school. There are many what am I going to say here? In the grammar schools that I have had opportunity to work with, they always have some form of scope and sequence. I remember working with one lady who put one word on the wall. When they were working in the summer, they put this word on the wall, and they said, okay, this is going to be our catchword. Okay? And they're going to take the word fly and create an entire curriculum around it. Bear in mind, they had state standards. They had language and science and history and all these requirements that they were supposed to do, but they were going to center it around this one word, fly. So in science, they talked about fly, insects that fly, animals that fly, birds that fly, people, they go into science, and they can talk about the biology of that. They can go into the history of it, the history of how people learn to fly, and they can go into technology and the technology of flight. And they use this one word throughout the whole semester, and they built a scope and a sequence. And it was just amazing that they could take one word, and with that one word, fit in all of the content that they needed to fit in, all around this concept of fly. And kids had a ball that year as they were looking at it. You could see the big picture with the scope and sequence that they developed. Okay. For your discussion, I'd like you to go look at the FSI, go look at the ACTFL, and assess your language abilities. I don't know what languages you speak other than English, but if you know a second language, go into the FSI, go into the ACTFL standards, and find out where you are. Where do you fit in that level, in that particular level? Also, I'd like you to do an oral interview. ACTFL uses something that they call an oral interview to find out where a particular student is with regard to their language ability. And what they will do is they will begin a student out with a nice, easy conversation, and then they'll begin to require the student to ask questions until the student gets to a point where they break. They can't do it anymore, and then the teacher will bring them back down to normal levels. What this means is you sit a student down and you ask, you're very just casual, hi, how are you, how are things? But then you begin to ask them questions. I typically do this initially with grammar type questions. I say, what do you do every day? Tell me about, things that you do every day. The student, well, I eat, I walk, I do it. That's present tense. And tell me what you're doing right now. Now I'm going to the present progressive. And tell me, what did you do before you came here? Well, before I came here, and I can go into the future, and I can go into the future progressive, and eventually I can get into things like conditional, or I'm pushing students until eventually I get students, I'm pushing them higher and higher to more difficult grammar and vocabulary. Eventually I get to the point where they're like, I can't do this, and they begin to break down. They're not going to be able to answer. And that's fine. Then I can gauge where they are by this little oral interview. Then I take them back down. I don't want to insult them. I don't want to embarrass them. I don't want to make them feel bad. I want to find out what their level is. And that's what this interview is all about. Then I break them back down to lower level type questions. I want to encourage them, and then I thank them, and then the interview is done. I'd like you to try that with somebody. Go out and find somebody that you know is a foreigner. English is not their first language, and interview them. do some type of oral interview where you can try to figure out where their breakdown is according to the ACTFL scale or according to the FSI scale. Find out where that break is, and that way you're going to get a little more practice in analyzing the abilities of your students. All right, well, that's all for today. Do want to let you know that you should be working on your paper. You should have some type of an outline with references. If you don't have an outline or a paper description now, you should be working on that pretty quickly. If you're having trouble with a topic, please come and see me. And also, you should be preparing your first critique, which is probably due next week. Finally, you should be reading the next chapter. And I do hope to hear from you. If you have any questions or problems, please give me